As fans of the real-time strategy genre, we know that nowadays it's generally considered fairly niche. But as we also know, that wasn't always the case. Back in the day, there was a new big strategy game basically out every week, and with all those releases came entries covering a manner of settings, from sci-fi to fantasy to historical, so it was never really difficult to try and find something that you were interested in. And while there were of course settings that were less popular than the big favourites, by no way did that mean that they had less potential for greatness. And that's no more apparent than with Company of Heroes. Back in 2006, most RTSs at the time were focused on ancient history or fantasy, so it was somewhat refreshing to see a title that covered World War II, a period of time that had seldom been explored in the strategy genre. Another boon for Company of Heroes was that it wasn't being developed by some no-name studio, but instead by Relic Entertainment, who were known for creating a bevy of excellent RTSs. The most recent title before had been Warhammer 40k Dawn of War, and had earlier created the absolutely excellent Homeworld series. Company of Heroes was praised to the high heavens upon its release, and the two expansions after it were similarly well received. And while there was a sequel put out in 2013, honestly I've hardly played it, and the response I get when asking people about its quality range from, yeah, it's pretty good, to, yeah, it's f***ing dog shit. So today, we're going to be sticking to the original. And so we lead to the question that I'm sure you're all thinking: should you play Company of Heroes in 2019? While Company of Heroes is a real-time strategy game, it's not like most of the traditional ones you've probably played. There's very minor base building, resources are generated passively, and there's no classic research or technology trees. Instead, this is a very streamlined and action-focused experience, which is quite unique to play even to this day. And although it's so action-packed, it's extremely tactical and you'll be rewarded for playing smart. With the expansions, the game features 4 factions, all of which are playable in multiplayer, as well as all having their own single-player campaigns. Outside the campaigns, each group also has 3 unique specializations, which unlock specific units and abilities based around a core tenet like infantry or armor. It's handled a bit differently in the campaign as it's tailored to the missions and the faction you're playing as. Speaking of the campaign, let's briefly cover that before we move on to the meat, which is definitely skirmish and multiplayer. Instead of one set of large missions, the single-player story is actually split into 6 segments, and they all focus on different characters, factions, and theatres of war. And unlike many RTS campaigns, Company of Heroes actually delivers a pretty good story throughout its runtime, with a focus on individual character struggles instead of just fighting battles with no-name soldiers. It's no slouch in the amount of content it offers either, and if you're looking to only spend your time in the campaign, then it'll take you a good while to finish it all, and you'll definitely get your money's worth. So while the campaign is solid, multiplayer and skirmish are, in my opinion, definitely the ideal ways to play Company of Heroes. All 4 factions from the campaigns are available to use, but there is a restriction on who's allowed to play on the same team. As the intention of the game is to be fairly realistic and historical, Company of Heroes doesn't allow you to mix and match Allied and Axis forces, which does limit the variety somewhat when you've got a few players. But hey, at least the historical immersion is kept intact. Once you do start the game, you'll want to pick a specialization for your chosen faction. Each get 3 to choose from, and they're all unique to whomever you're playing as. All focus on a different aspect of combat, and they unlock specific units and abilities for you to deploy once you have the points for them, which are generated passively through battle. Keep in mind you're stuck with the choice you make for the rest of the game once it's been made, so if you're playing with a team, you want to coordinate to make sure you've got a variety of strengths and you're covering each other's weaknesses. A great thing about this system is that even if you're playing solo, the base set of units are still varied enough that you won't find yourself struggling to deal with specific situations if you pick a more niche specialization like, say, artillery. Once you get playing, you'll notice fairly quickly that the maps are generally quite small for the number of players on them, so it's not long before battle lines are drawn and action heats up. And now because your resources are generated passively by capturing points across the map, you're incentivized to constantly push forward to secure more points and feed your growing war machine, which leads to most games being action-packed from start to finish. Which is great, because the action in Company of Heroes is excellent. Now you've probably heard the term rock, paper, scissors being used when talking about real-time strategy games. It refers to how units are countered by those of different types, and good against others. Rock beats scissors, paper beats rock, scissors beat paper, and so it goes on. And although this model is apparent in nearly every RTS you've ever played, I'd never seen it more utilised than in Company of Heroes. And since we're in World War II, this all makes perfect sense. In a real-world situation, no amount of small arms fire will take down a tank, despite what some artisans may tell you. Here, if you want to effectively take something out, then you'll need to counter it. But your opponents will be trying to counter your counter, so you've got to do your best to cover all your possible bases. And one thing I love about Company of Heroes is how each unit just feels so valuable. In a lot of RTSs, you're often producing massive armies and throwing hundreds of units at each other with no real regard for their survival or longevity. Each individual unit is rather inconsequential on its own, and while those games do of course reward tactical play to a degree, it often just comes down to who can heave the most units at each other the fastest. But since being smart in Company of Heroes is so effective, each unit's potential value is increased by a huge margin. For example, if you take the average tank and place it against another in a fair fight, you'll probably trade 1 for 1. But if you use a flank and stack the odds in your favour, that same one vehicle can have a much bigger impact for the same upfront cost. Making clever use of tactics is extremely important, and neglecting that fact can easily lead you to getting completely demolished. The game rewards you for being smart and utilising systems like its dynamic cover and destructible environments, which can be very, very advantageous. All this lends to a combat system that rewards smart plays and punishes short-sighted ones. And there's so much depth for such a fast-paced game. I didn't even talk about the unit veterancy, upgrading individual units with special weapons and abilities, how each faction has a different type of building system, and a lot more that I haven't mentioned. When you're working with a team of people who are all utilising their specializations well, playing smart and working together, the Company of Heroes is one of the most enjoyable co-op RTS experiences that I can recommend. And luckily, even if you're playing solo, there's easily enough depth to have a great time, despite the lack of having a coordinated team to back you up. Taking a look at Company of Heroes, you probably wouldn't think that it's a 13-year-old game. Graphically, it's held up shockingly well, and it's still quite the visual experience all things considered. Landscapes look great along with elements like houses and bridges, and the destructible environments add a lot of authenticity, and seeing the map get slowly obliterated through artillery and the like over a match looks really cool. But the main star of the show in my opinion is the game's vast array of historical vehicles and weaponry, which as far as I can tell are all recreated lovingly and accurately. Despite the models being 13 years old, not until you really scroll in do you get the idea that they're of that age. When viewing from the game's standard distance and getting a decent view of the battlefield, they easily look as good as you might remember. Everything feels so lifelike, and that's in no small part to the game's excellent sound design. Tank engines rumble across open plains, artillery shells rain from above, and cannon fire slams into armor with a heavy thud. And the voice acting is similarly well done, and I love how the intensity of a situation is often reflected in the lines of your soldiers and vehicles. And of course we can't forget about the soundtrack. While it's no Hell March, thematically it's very appropriate and it works well as a backdrop to the gameplay and visuals, which honestly is what I want for a game like this. The last thing to consider when regarding its age is its availability and compatibility of modern systems. And I am happy to report that it's very easy to get your hands on Company of Heroes, no dodgy websites required. You can pick it up on Steam for $20 US with fully functional multiplayer and mod support via the included Legacy Edition. One thing that isn't so positive though is how it runs. Now this may not apply to you, but all I can speak to is how it performed on my system, and also what I've heard from friends. You may have noticed in some of this footage, but when the action heats up and there's a lot of things on screen, Company of Heroes can run like a dog. I found the FPS would often tank noticeably, not to unplayable levels mind you, but still. It may be incompatibility with modern hardware standards, hell it may just be incompatibility with my hardware specifically, but I thought it was worth mentioning either way. All things considered, Company of Heroes is fairly easy to pick up and play in 2019, which is not something I can say for every old RTS I've looked at, so I'm happy to be able to here. Another benefit when playing a game that's this old, especially in RTS, is that there's often a hardy selection of mods available that can change up the experience drastically, and here it's no exception. With examples like the ever popular Blitzkrieg, which keeps the core of the game while altering mechanics and unit selection, to the total version of modern combat, there is a surprising list of free, high-quality, community-made mods for you to play and enjoy. And what's awesome is that a lot of the best ones are available to download directly through Steam, which makes installing and playing them as easy as literally clicking 2 or 3 buttons. All you've got to do is make sure you own the game on the platform, click install, and you're done. It's so refreshing to have mods be so simple and painless to download and install, all without needing to edit any base files of the game yourself. It's really great, and I wish we saw this more often on older RTSs like this. Company of Heroes is the best World War II strategy game, period. While it has received a sequel, the price of that and its expansions alone are surely enough to turn some people off. And the fact that opinions on it are mixed at best means you should probably just stick to the first, unless you've done some research beforehand and know what you're getting into. Or you've seen a particular content creator's video on it, coming soon to you. There's not really a bad thing I can say about Company of Heroes without getting into mostly irrelevant minutiae. The gameplay is exciting, tactical, and rewarding. The graphics and sound design are still somehow excellent. You can buy it legally and digitally. There's an array of excellent mods available to download extremely easily. There's working multiplayer support, the campaigns are great. Seriously, what more do you want? If you haven't bought or played Company of Heroes and you like action RTSs, then you're missing out. That's my recommendation for playing it in 2019. Trust me, you won't be disappointed. Thanks for watching, everyone. Now, just at the end here, I would like to say we have a new community Discord, so feel free to join that. Links on screen and in the description. If you want to come in, talk about games, play some old RTSs like we did for this. Shout out to the people in the Discord who played the community Company of Heroes game. It was really fun. There's footage from this in the video. So if you'd like to be part of that for future videos, then jump on over. I'd love to see you over there. Also, I stream 5 days a week on Twitch, and if you want updates on the channel, then pop over to my Twitter. There's links to all these in the description. Thanks again, and we'll see you all next time.